college students back to this class in Angelology. This is a doctorate level course, I think 701. This will be lecture number 10. Last session we were talking about Satan and his plan against humanity, against God, and all the things that he was doing and is doing throughout the earth. I want to continue today with this lecture on Satan's rebellion and fall, and talk about Satan and Job. And this will give you some insight into what Satan is doing today, but also the fact that he was a fallen cherubim angel, and that he had to present himself to God and give an account of what he's doing in the earth, and then how he attacks certain people and accuses certain people. He is the accuser of the brethren. I took a lot of this from Gordon Lindsay's book on Satan's fall and rebellion, and other books. I wrote a book, my book, on God Our Refuge, and in that book it talks about Job and how God had hedged him about. So let's get started today, and then I'll try to bring some things up on the question of Job and Satan. To fully understand Satan's plan of action against humanity, we must turn to the book of Job, which throws positive light upon God's reason for permitting Satan's freedom to tempt the human race. Now, always remember that God doesn't tempt us to ever do evil. That's in James chapter 1, 14, I think, 13 and 14. But Satan is the one that tempts us to do evil. It's highly significant that the book of Job was the first book of the Bible to be written, and I believe that is the case. It's also one of the books of poetry in the Bible. It was written before the law, and for it would scarcely have been possible in a discussion covering the whole field of divine providence, as occurs in our in this book, to have avoided reference to the law had the law been known. I mean, this book was written long before the law came into being. There's a lot of thought about Job was maybe instrumental in helping design the Great Pyramid of Egypt, that he was well known throughout the world for his wisdom, and a very respected man of the world. Job is not the only the first book of the Bible, but in all probability it was the first written document of any kind that is still in existence. Now, I believe the first document, or the first book ever written, was the book of Enoch. And in the book of Enoch, it talks about Enoch the scribe. Well, he's a scribe. If he's a scribe, he was a writer. Also, Dr. Church, J.R. Church, believes that he also wrote the very first book ever written, which was the book of Enoch, and it was written in original Hebrew, which he believed was the language of God himself. And of course, then the language that was passed down to the Hebrew people was Hebrew. And I think that probably came down through the line of Shem and Noah. But Enoch wrote the very first book ever written. So we can see how vitally important this book is. Now, the thing about it is, the book of Enoch is, we have it now, and there was one manuscript from the Ethiopian manuscript, the other one was from the Dead Sea Scrolls manuscript, other manuscripts that were come together, but now we have it put together. R.H. Charles, back in 1917, put together a translation of that rabbinic and also of Jasher and also Jubilees. So we can see this is very important, this book. And since it was the very first word that God wrote to man in this book. Now, the challenge of Satan, let's look at this here. In Job 1:6, we're told that on a certain day, when the sons of God presented themselves before the Lord, Satan came also among them. The sons of God, in these contexts, are angels. So evidently, the angels have to present themselves to God and give an account of what they're doing in the universe. Of course, I think the Lord already knows, but the angels have to give an account. The Lord took note of his presence, saying, "Where do you come from?" And this statement reveals that Satan no longer dwelt with the righteous angels, since his presence among them occasioned a question. Though the fallen angels no longer dwelt with the loyal angels, yet we observe that Satan himself still had to give access to the presence of God. And that is a limited access that he's given. And that's why some say he's still the accuser of the brethren. When you get over to Revelation, even Revelation chapter 12, it talks about that the accuser of the brethren will be cast out by Michael the archangel. The devil had one purpose on his visit. It was to call God's attention to how thoroughly evil had triumphed all over the earth, thus supporting his contention that man would not serve God if temptation was sufficiently strong to do otherwise. Job becomes the center of this conflict. God answers Satan by reminding him of his servant, Job, by saying, "There's none like him on the earth, a perfect man." Now there were 4 things that God knew that Job was doing. Now I put this in my book, God Our Refuge, how God's principles of divine protection. Why did God hedge about Job? And Satan knew that Job had a hedge of protection around him, that he could not touch him. So God is going to tell Satan why. There were 4 reasons of why he had hedged him about. Number 1, he says he's a perfect man, one that fears God, one that shuns evil, and one that is loyal to God. Satan had his stock answer already. He charged that Job feared God only because what he could get out of him, how to get out of God. Now, but he did know that God hedged Job about, and he couldn't touch him without evidently God's permission. And that's why I went into great detail in my book about this, because you see, I believe God hedges believers about, and he hedges us about with protection. And if we'll keep our hedges up, Satan can't touch us. That God had protected him, made a hedge about him, gave him wealth and prosperity. Satan contended that once this prosperity was taken away from Job, he would curse God to his face. And God accepted the challenge and permitted the test to take place. Now, remember, this is a limited test, because God says you can do things to him, but you can't kill him. And there are certain limitations that Satan had put on him, where God was going to make sure that Satan couldn't take his life. With permission granted, Satan went forth to bring disaster upon Job. And the Sabaeans came. Number 1, this is several things that took place here quickly after Satan was having permission. Satan gets these Sabaeans. Sabaeans were from Arabia, and they came and took away his oxen and his donkeys. The Chaldeans stole his camels. They were the ones out of Babylon. Then, as a crowning misfortune, his children were slain in a violent storm, which destroyed their house that they were occupying, which incidentally shows Satan's active role in destructive storms. Satan does have a role in destructive storms, and we certainly know that from when Jesus was in the boat in the Sea of Galilee with his own disciples, and there arose a great storm while he was asleep in the boat, and it was there was waves, coming up over and water into the boat, and the disciples asked him if he even cared if they perished or not, and Jesus got up and stilled the storm, and then he rebuked them for not doing this, rebuking the storm. He was telling them, he was saying, I gave you power to do this. So why did you get into fear and you didn't stand up in faith and rebuke the storm? You should have been rebuking the storm, not me, but you should have done it. And he says, oh, you of little faith. I mean, he chided them pretty good. And this is a lesson for us. When I see storms coming or hear them coming, I stand up and rebuke those storms. I rebuke those storms. I tell them they can't come and hit our homes and our houses and our church people, that God is going to protect us, hedge us about, put hedges of protection around us. And let me tell you, peace be still. Say, peace be still, like Jesus did. Stop those storms. But God's confidence in Job was not misplaced. The godly patriarch would not relinquish his faith in God and worship Him. He said, the Lord gives and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord, in Job 1:21. Poor Job, he could not know, for the reasons that can be understood. God could not reveal to him the true nature of the events that were taking place. The Lord had given to Job, and it was the devil who was taken away. Nor could Job realize that he was the center of attention of two worlds, heaven and hell. That God and His angels, as well as the devil and his angels, were watching with intense interest the outcome of the test of Job and what he was going through. But through Job was humbled, though Job was humbled and broken, he stood true to God. You might remember in this story that his wife first said, curse God and die. And then his friends, and I'll get to that in a minute. But his friends also said, well, the reason that you're being attacked is because you think you're self-righteous. Again, the devil came before God, and again, God called his attention to Job, who had faithfully maintained his integrity despite the fiery trial and the cruel sorrows he had endured in the loss of his property and children. But Satan was not silenced, and he said, skin for skin, yea, all that man hath he'll give up for his life. But put forth thy hand now and touch his bone and flesh, and he will curse you to your face. Job 2:25 or 2:5. Well, if you read the story in Job, you find that there was boils and a lot of painful sores and all kinds of things that came upon him, and he was in a lot of pain and a lot of misery. He looked hideous, and his wife said, curse God and die. His friend said, you might as well just give up. But Job stayed with it. It's evident that Job, in granting permission to Satan, it's evident that God, in granting permission to Satan to put boils upon the flesh of Job, had an important purpose in view. With God, a most vital principle was at stake, a principle which Satan had challenged. God's contention was that regardless of how great the temptation Satan might present, there would always be those who would serve God at all cost, and that is true. And over the thousands of years of Christianity, the martyrs and the many that have died, I can tell you that they stay faithful. God wins a battle through Job's faithfulness. Satan went out from the presence of God and afflicted Job with sores from head to foot. Job's wife, a frivolous and earthly-minded woman, when she saw what had happened to her husband, advised him, curse God and die. This suggestion Job indignantly rejected, and very properly. He rebuked his faithless wife for these impious words. His friends came and viewed his abject condition, but they could not explain the riddle of his misfortunes. They concluded that he had committed some grievous sin. Job, too, could not account for his predicament and believed that God had smitten him for inscrutable and mysterious reasons. He knew nothing of dramatic character of the conflict that was going on, and was quite unaware that it was Satan who had placed these boils upon him, nor that his lowly bed among the ashes where he scraped himself was the center of attention of two worlds. Let me tell you, he was staying faithful to God. He didn't really know the reason, but he just stayed faithful to God. And the ultimate end of this is that he is totally healed. And I want you to understand here, it was not God that put the boils and the things on Job. It was Satan. Sickness and disease comes from Satan. God does not put sickness and disease on people to make you better or to make you holier or to make you more humble. He just doesn't do that. Satan is the author of sickness and disease, and he puts the sickness and disease on people. Nevertheless, Job rose to sublime heights of faith when he said, though he slay me, yet will I trust him, in Job 13:15. And by these words, Satan's indictment that a man would not serve God beyond a certain point was proven false. Job, by his faithfulness, had justified God's confidence in him, as well as having vindicated the integrity and soundness of the plan of God. The test was over. God healed Job and gave him twice as much as he had to begin with in Job 42:12 through 17. There was always the question of why did God remove the hedge? Why did Satan want to attack him? And what was the doorway of Satan's attack into Job's life? A couple of things I'll mention to you. I think Job got into fear and not faith. Now, let me give you an example. Over in chapter 1 of Job, it talks about Job's children, and maybe into 2 also. And that Job was afraid that his children were not serving God and not sacrificing to God to please God. So Job would go out and sacrifice on their behalf for sacrifices to God on behalf of his own children. And he got into fear over that they weren't being loyal to God. And later we find over in Job chapter 3, Job is talking and he says, the thing that I feared the most has now come up on me. I believe fear is the doorway of which Satan had to enter into Job's life and do all this, and God allowed it. And also, Job was not self-righteous like some of his friends thought, but it was fear. Fear's opposite faith, and I believe that was where he had gotten into trouble. So, the whole thing, though, the whole end of the story is Job came out with twice as much as he had before. Now, I want to continue and talk a little bit about the fallen angels. Lucifer being an angel in a fallen condition, there were other fallen angels. See, he took about 1/3 of the angels with him in this rebellion against God. We looked in Isaiah 14 and also in Ezekiel 28, talking about Lucifer's fall And then in Revelation 12, verse 4, it talks about a third. He drew a third of the angels of stars from heaven with his tail in this rebellion. Well, when you get over and start reading in the book of Enoch and the book of Jubilees, and even mentions in the book of Jasher about these fallen angels, some of them that had fallen with Lucifer. Now, Satan has an army of spirit beings, fallen angels, and demon spirits. And according to the book of Enoch and Jubilees, in the days of Enoch's father, Jared, the angel Azrael, and that's A-Z-A-R-Z-E-L, Azrael, descended to earth. And where did he descend? Well, he descended on Mount Hermon up in northern Israel, up in the area of the old tribe of Dan. If you go to Israel on tour, you'll come to, they usually take you to a place called Caesarea Philippi. And I've been up there a couple of times, and at the base of Mount Hermon, and I've even been there in May and June, and there's still snow on top of Mount Hermon. And as that snow melts, it runs off and forms the Jordan River. And at Caesarea, there's quite a little dam there and quite a bit of water there. But also over to the side, there is a big cave opening, and it's called the Gates of Hell. Now, that's what the Romans called it. And of course, this cave was a big cave in the mountain. The Romans built a big facade out in the front of it, and it had a wall around it, and it had the gates of hell over the top of it. And the god of Pan is inlaid into the side of the mountain there in the rock, and these other gods. But the Jews believed that was, and maybe the Romans too, that cave was a portal into the underworld. And you might remember in Matthew 16, Jesus was asking his disciples, "Who do people say I am?" And they said, "Well, you're Elijah, you're the prophet, this and that." He says, "Well, Peter, who do you say I am?" And he says, "Well, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God." And then he says, "Flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father has revealed this to you by the Spirit." Upon this revelation, I believe, upon this rock, upon this revelation, the rock is the revelation of who Christ is, "I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against them." Well, I think he was pointing at the gates of hell over there in Caesarea, and said that the authority of hell will not prevail against my church. Well, in this area here, and this was an evil place, because on Mount Hermon is where these angels, there were 200 of them that descended down from heaven out of the fallen angel group. And in the book of Enoch, it lists who the leaders of all these. There was 10 leaders over groups of 20 angels, and it names all of the leaders of these. Simza was another one, Semyaza, and he's another one of these leaders. And after some years of success, a band of 200 angels descended down. And Simza was in charge, and he descended on Mount Hermon, intent on doing the same thing. And God considered angelic marriage, procreation, and empire building a crime against his creation. And Arizel was chained under the valley of Beit Hadu until Judgment Day. Now that may be an area of the underworld called Tartarus. And so let's look at just a minute about Arizel, the scapegoat. The interesting thing about Arizel, now what they did, Arizel and Simza came down and took these other angels, and they found the daughters of men. Then they looked beautiful to them, and they had relations with them, and they produced the race of giants. And it tells us that in Genesis chapter 6. The interesting thing about Arizel is that he not only is mentioned in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but in the Bible itself. His name appears in the ritual of the scapegoat performed on the Jewish festival of Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement. During the festival of Yom Kippur, there is a prophetic ceremony that involves 2 goats. 2 nearly identical goats are selected and brought before the high priest. The high priest places his hands on one of the goats. Another priest brings out the ophel, a box containing lots. And one of the lots is randomly drawn by the high priest and placed with the first goat. Then the other is withdrawn for the second goat. On one lot is an engraving, the Lord, meaning the Lord. The goat that randomly acquired the lot for the Lord is sacrificed for the sins of the people. This animal is a perfect representation of the Messiah, dying for the sins of the world. Now that is the goat of the Lord. And the other lot is engraved with a meaning that is for Arizel. This has a commonly been translated scapegoat. That's where we get the term scapegoat. But we have seen that Arizel is actually a proper name, the name of a particular fallen angel. Moses wrote about this ceremony in Leviticus chapter 16, saying, "And Aaron shall cast lots upon these 2 goats, one for the Lord and the other for the scapegoat. And Aaron shall bring the goat upon which the Lord's lot fell and offer him as a sin offering. But the goat on which the lot fell to be the scapegoat shall be presented alive before the Lord to make atonement with him, and let him go for a scapegoat into the wilderness." And they would find the biggest, strongest guy they had that was in good shape, put the scapegoat over his shoulders, and he had to walk a day's journey into the wilderness and then let the scapegoat go. And then he would let the scapegoat, and he'd turn around and walk all the way back and find the tabernacle. The whole theory behind this is, and the whole, not theory, but the whole lesson of this whole thing is that God, they confessed the sins of Israel for the whole year upon this scapegoat. And this scapegoat was to carry those sins as far as the east is from the west, so that God would not ever see them and ever remember them again. But there had to be something innocent die for the guilty. So the innocent goat was punished like the Messiah. It was a picture of Jesus dying on the cross. So this is a lesson for us. This is all found in Leviticus chapter 16, and you can read the story. It says on the Day of Atonement. The ancient book of Enoch, preserved by the Ethiopians and found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, contains not only accurate prophecy, but also the story of Simza. Simza and a band of 200 angels saw that Arizel, what he was doing, and decided to do the same thing. They descended on Ardis, the summit of Mount Hermon, and bound themselves by an oath to take wives and have children. The reason they had to do the oath is because Simza said, well, if I go and find me a woman and do this sin, then I don't want to be the one that takes all the blame. I want all of you to be a part of this. So they all bound with an oath, and they all took the oath, and they all went out and found women and did this, and God hated it, and he pronounced judgment upon them, and reshaped the world into his own making. In other words, not only that, but Simza and some of these angels, these fallen angels, trained the women how to make potions to drink, to abort babies. They learned to make hybrids of the animals and the plants. What this whole thing was, Satan was trying to pervert everything. trying to pervert everything that God had created. And these were the days of Jared, Enoch's father, about 460 to 622 years after creation. Ariel had already taken a wife by this time, and some rabbis taught that his wife was Naamah, daughter of Lamech. She would not be confused with Naamah, the daughter of Enoch, who was the wife of Noah. Their descendants were known as the Siddim. The Siddim was a class of pre-flood Nephilim giants who were worshipped as guardian spirits by the Anakims. For today, I'm going to stop here on this session, and next session we'll continue on talking a little bit about these fallen angels, and then maybe the Katabole. So thank you very much, and God bless you for taking these.